Welcome, everyone, to Humanity Rising, day 744, Lasting Peace in Europe, What's Necessary and What's Possible. I'm Tom Eddington, and I have been delighted to be hosting this mini-series this week on the Ukraine, and particularly happy to be hosting today where we're going to be discussing lasting peace in Europe, what's necessary and what's possible. Jim Garrison is still away. He's in France, and hopefully will be his health will allow him to rejoin tomorrow. But it's been an honor and a privilege to be hosting this week's conversation on the Ukraine, and I can say it's been such a delight to have Katerina Yasko with us on Monday, and she's rejoining us today as a moderator, and Ake van Nimwegen, who from the Netherlands. The two of them have done an extraordinary job of producing this week's panel and conversations, where we've had an opportunity to really understand what it's like to be in the Ukraine, dealing with the tragedies, the Russian invasion and the war that's been going on there over the last 17 months, and in addition to the annexation of Crimea roughly 10 years ago. So I'm going to invite all of us to just take a moment to breathe, as we do here on Humanity Rising, and just invite you to take a moment to ground, to become present. And Georg will bring up an art card, and I'll encourage each of us to just take an in-breath for approximately 5.5 seconds. And then when we hear the gong, take an exhale for about 5.5 seconds. We'll take 10 breaths together, just as an opportunity to become fully present to this important topic of peace in Europe. So Georg, thank you. Welcome, everyone. As I said, our focus today is a discussion on lasting peace in Europe. And when we think about certainly World War II, that was supposed to be the war to end all wars. And when we think about peace, there's certainly a shared understanding that peace is more than the absence of war. We've had lots of questions this week about how do we get to peace in the Ukraine, and so delighted to be in this conversation today. And I'd like to start by just reintroducing Katerina Yasko, who was with us on Monday. As I shared, she's a psychologist, educator, dialogue facilitator, civic activist, guide in the Ukrainian history, culture, and current socio-political context. Her academic background is in the area of international relations and law, where she holds a master's degree in law, an MBA in business, an MS in psychology. For more than a decade, she's been an active explorer of Ken Wilber's integral approach to adult development. And she's a certified trainer in nonviolent communication, just an extraordinary human being. And we're delighted to have you back with us again today. And thank you for moderating today's panel.
Thank you very much, Tom, and Ubiquity University and community for having us today. I would like to start from just a few words of introduction and sharing how the whole idea of this discussion and speakers lineup emerged. So in March 2023, after the Ubiquity Summit on Ukraine, I contacted Jim, and after a few exchanges, he kindly offered me to get together speakers with a different perspective, different from what was offered at that part of the summit, calling for the immediate ceasefire, peaceful talks, and stopping arming Ukraine. So I'm delighted today to actually continue our conversations that started the day before yesterday by Auke's wonderful presentation on values development in Europe in the context of Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then yesterday's session with our friend and colleague Mikhail Vinitsky, moderated by Auke van Nieuwegen, speaking about the Ukrainian democracy and how is it developing, and what are the rocky stones that we are facing, and at the same time finding ways and solution how to overcome them and how to continue our path towards a democratic and prosperous society, notwithstanding all the difficulties that we're facing at the moment. And so today, I am very happy to have more friends and colleagues offering their perspective, not only from the Western Europe, because Auke will have his part, and I'm very grateful that he's also joining with very important angle that he will cover today, but also from the Eastern Europe, not only from Ukraine, but also Belarus. So today I would like to start with inviting Valerii Pekar, who is a civic activist, author of a number of books and hundreds of articles. He could be considered, in my view, a father of the Ukrainian integral movement. He's also a father of the Ukrainian Independent Ukraine Civic Society, in a way. Valerii is a businessman. He is a lecturer in several Ukrainian business schools, including Kyiv-Mohyla Business Academy and Lviv Business School. He is the one who has been participating a number of times in the Integral European Conference and has been a contributor to many international events, speaking about Ukraine and Europe in the geopolitical context. So over to you, Valerii.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to offer today some ideas about scenarios for the future and a way to sustainable peace in Europe. If I may, I will use the language of spiral dynamics, which maybe is not considered as very relevant, but just to explain the ideas. So let's consider the world as the development of social, political, and mental and spiritual systems. And I now will explain in a minute what these colors mean for those who isn't familiar with the colors of spiral dynamics. But here I would like to show where we are and where we are going. Ukraine and Russia left Soviet Union being practically on the same level of social, political, economic, and mental development. And now we are going different ways. But why and how? So first, let's say where we are going from. The traditional system is a system of empires and colonies with a very extractive economy, according to Darwin and Jimoglu, with patron-client politics. Sometimes it looks like a feudal system, sometimes, but Soviet socialist system is practically the same. The dominant values are paternalistic, order, stability, care, narrow ethnic identity, and subjects, not citizens, and closed social elevators. This is the place where we are going from, and the big part of Ukraine is still very traditional, but an essential part of Ukraine is already modern. What is modernity for us? Modernity is a national state, its inclusive economy, accountable governance and political parties, modern values, rational critical thinking, national identity of political nations, citizens, not subjects, and closed social elevators. So this is where we're going from and where we're going to. And what about Russia? Russia started from its travel from the same position, but going back. What is this back? This is an archaic social political system, which is ruled by force, with a highly extractive economy and highly centralized, I say hyper-centralized state. Sometimes people call it a mafia state because it's a state captured by one group of people. And what is important, traditional values, traditional paternalistic values, are replaced by values of criminal subculture, survival at the bottom and domination at the top, installed by 2 decades in Russia by broadcasts, movies, songs, and other popular cultures. With the cult of leaders and what is important, it differs from Soviet system with lack of legal succession mechanism, not like Soviet Politburo, which decided who will be a successor in the case of death of a leader. So this is the picture where we're going from and where we're going to, and what about Russia. So now we have to ask ourselves why Ukraine is going forward and Russia is going backward. Because of 2 things. First is the idea of the West. The idea of the West, the idea of Europe in Ukrainian case, attracts Ukraine. It is even mentioned in Ukrainian constitution, but it doesn't attract Russia. Vice versa. It is the idea that Russia is not a part of the West. Russia isn't a part of Europe. And another one is the idea of political nations. Ukraine is attracted by the idea of political nations, like other political nations of European continent, like Germans, French, Poles, Czechs, and so on. And this idea isn't proper for Russia because Russia is still an empire with 100 of different nationalities and peoples. And if Russia accepts the idea of political nation, that means that Russia will go back to its borders of 16th century, and dozens of new states and new nations will appear. So in this picture, you can see that Ukraine is fighting for its future to go to modernity, and Russia is fighting for its past. This is an explanation. What is the basic fundamental reason for the war, and what is the fundamental reason for Russia's defeat? Then let's discuss the idea of negotiations. Many political leaders in the West say that negotiations could establish peace just in one day, but all those statements ignore two major factors of this negotiation, Russian factor and Ukrainian factor. Russian factor is ignored because Russia wages the war for existence of Ukrainian nation, not for territories. Putin doesn't have red lines which couldn't be crossed. Putin doesn't need to save face because his propaganda could explain absolutely everything, and he doesn't need to consult with citizens which support them. Indeed, it is possible that Putin one day will go to the negotiations, but if not, when armed forces of Ukraine will restore its territorial integrity, is this the end of the war? Maybe this day Putin will go to negotiations, but if not, he has no reasons to go to that. And then take another factor, Ukrainian factor. Are Ukrainian people ready to trade the lives of their relatives and friends on the occupied territories, being murdered, raped, taken as hostages, tortured, sent to a concentration camp, including children which are raped and kidnapped and moved to Russian families in Siberia, let's say. So negotiations are likely only if both sides are ready, but if not, and then I would like to use again the terms of spiral dynamics just to understand what we are facing. We're facing the red challenge. That red challenge not only in terms that Soviet time, Soviet state was associated with a red color, but in terms of spiral dynamics. Red is the rule of force. Red doesn't think about long-term consequences. Red considers politeness as weakness, and red never remembers lessons of the past. And what is important, red never negotiates, because negotiations are considered by red as weakness. And red understands only middle responses. So we can see the idea on the picture. And we, people of the West, sometimes are captured by a trap with our green vision. Green in terms not only of green energy and Green Deal, but in terms of spiral dynamics, the postmodern empathic view. Green understands war as conflict of two evils, where good people suffer on both sides. And Greens sometimes say that no matter who wins and who loses, start dialogue as soon as possible. We don't care who rapes and who was raped, just reconcile, because conflict is bad, war is bad. And this is because a green meme can see a war when one party is fighting for the very life, for freedom, for independence, and against dictatorship. And war isn't over when Green's TV stops to show it. War somewhere is continued. That is why green meme is lost in the face of red meme aggression. Since you're advocating for peace and harmony, green often undermines it and answers to red aggression just with peace mantra, Stockholm syndrome, and the habit of powerlessness. So what to do in this case? How to respond adequately to this challenge? We should take an integral view on that. A green empathic meme says us that both parties needs a dialogue. Ceasefire should stop the war. Don't provide parties with a weapon and everything will be over. There is room for compromise. In any conflicts, both parties are guilty. And how can we be sure that we know the truth of the war? But if we are integral enough, we should also go to other memes and see the orange meme of modern thinking, not only postmodern green, but modern thinking says that there is truth, there are facts which can be established. And when we know the truth, the opposite is lie, and there is no symmetry between rapist and victim. And we can go and include also blue meme, which states that there is a clear difference between good and evil. And we go then to see and include our healthy red meme, who says that who exchange freedom for security loses both. And we can even include our healthy purple meme, which says a very, very old wisdom of ages. Whoever comes to kill you, kill him first. Whoever says he'd like to kill you, believe him. So that's an interesting view. And then let's consider scenarios for the for peace in Europe, which means scenarios, first of all, for development of situation in Russia. So there are two major scenarios, or rather two major groups of scenarios for Russia. First is consolidation of power in Kremlin, and another is dissolution of power in Kremlin. In case of consolidation of power, it could be very different scenario. It could be Stalinizations made by Putin, or it could be transfer of power by Putin, or it could be a coup d'etat, which is traditional in Russian history. It could be a certain managed transfer to either to doves or to hawks. But in all those scenarios, we have continued war, growing of nuclear threat, and extreme strengthening of China, because this defeated Russia with consolidated power is going to be just a client state for China, which we can consider even now. The strengthening of China is strengthening of the whole world authoritarian axis. This is the group of scenarios of consolidation of power. And second group of scenarios of dissolution of power in Russia, which means terminal collapse, have absolutely unaccepted risks of proliferation of nuclear weapons, internal conflicts, ethnic cleansings, and large-scale refugee crisis, maybe the biggest in European history. And again, excessive strengthening of China with Russian resources would be captured. So two main scenarios of development of events in Russia presents both absolutely unacceptable risks, either consolidation of power in Kremlin or dissolution of power in Kremlin. So in both scenarios, Ukraine lose, Europe lose, America lose, and China wins. So the answer is that this dichotomy is false. This is a result of a Moscow centrism that which try to find all answers just in Moscow, either power is consolidated or it is dissoluted. By the way, let's discuss in a moment, is a real democracy possible in Russia? Indeed, every nation could go to democracy, but to install a democracy, you need some Democrats. Some democratic people. Democratic elections means political parties, equal access to media, protection of canvassers and observers, and honest counting, and NGOs and courts and so on. So all those things which we need to protect democracy, and all those things are absent today. Here, I would like to remind the quotation of Russian philosopher Nikolai Berdyaev. 100 years ago, he said, from February to October of the 1917, all kinds of parties and ideas paraded before the admiring Russian gaze. And what did the Russian man choose? He chose what he had, that is a Tsar and an empire. We know the story of 20th century. So, but there is a third scenario, the scenario of where power in Kremlin is weakened and there are new centers of power. Is this just a wishful thinking, or is this a decolonization scenario real? First of all, I would like to say that all major risks here are prevented, are avoided. Both nuclear risks, because new independent states will transfer nuclear weapons to international agencies. Both humanitarian risks and catastrophes are prevented because of agreements between new independent nations, and Chinese risk, because all those Turkic-speaking and Mongol-speaking peoples of Siberia and Volga region and so on, they indeed hate the idea of Chinese growth and strengthening. Just looking at their peoples of Uyghur and Tibet. So what holds the empire together? Some ties, which are a distribution of money by the center, fear of punishment, indeed, common identity, common ideology, career journey of elites, and indeed social inertia. Nothing of that works now. No more money for distribution, no more fear of punishment because law enforcements are so weak, no more common identity, and no more common ideology offered by Putin, and indeed social inertia and stability and order are now undermined. So we have the day by day, we have permanent decline of unity and legitimacy of Moscow government. And if we should compare 1991, when Soviet Union disappeared, and today, we will see some similarities. Economic difficulties, weakening the center, full of ideologies, that time communist ideology, today Putin ideology, and the rise of identities, and lack of stability and security, and rising disorder, and weakening of enforcement agencies, and maturity of local elites, and high probability of local conflicts. All those things we saw in 1991, and now we have absolutely all those points which are already active. But we have some new factors, which is failed war now, but not in 1991, sanctions. That time, United States helped Soviet Union. Now there are sanctions, low oil prices, demographic factor very different from 40 years ago, availability of information cooperation tools, first of all, internet, and new power players with their interests, China, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, which weren't active 30 years ago, and the very important and encouraging and inspiring success stories of Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Estonia, Lithuania, and other states which become independent in 1991. So we are going this way, and we should learn some lessons from 1991. Legitimacy weakened gradually, and then one day disintegration rapidly happens, immediately happens, because people want to preserve security and stability. And when Moscow provided them with security and stability, everything is fine. And when Moscow is not a source of security and stability, but is a source of disorder and insecurity, they opt for new independent countries, nations, for new countries according to their national identity. And that means that a return to the business usually isn't possible, because the old system is absolutely ready to crash. I would like to remind that again, 1991, when Gorbachev was no longer in control, but the West, first of all, the United States, supported him and couldn't see the scenarios of the future. Just Google the so-called Chicken Kyiv speech, a speech of American President Bush, George Bush Sr., just 3 weeks before Ukrainian independence. He visited Kyiv, trying to prevent disappearance of Soviet Union, which that time practically disappeared. So the collapse is inevitable and risks unacceptable, so the process must be managed. So what should we do? Understand the risk, create an international coalition, stay true to the basic principles of United Nations, like self-determination of colonized nations and territories, and support peaceful decolonization and peaceful reconstruction of Northern Eurasia, based on the key principles of denuclearization, of peaceful resolution of conflicts, of protection of human rights, and so on, and indeed build relations with new independent states in advance. And I would like to finish with the so-called Sustainable Peace Manifesto, which was prepared a few months ago by several dozens of Ukrainian public intellectuals, under the umbrella, under the motto, Never Again 2.0. The motto Never Again meant the complicated political and diplomatic measures which prevented war in Europe for 70 years. But now we see again a war in Europe. That means that we need Never Again 2.0 to ensure stability and sustainable peace. And here we have no controversy between justice and lasting peace. Justice, because justice isn't possible without peace, and peace isn't possible without justice. War criminals must be punished, and losers must be compensated. And indeed, people forcibly removed from Ukraine must be returned. First of all, stolen and illegally adopted children, but also some specific measures like Russian propaganda must be blocked. And there are some specific measures to reduce risks of aggressive war. And indeed, here we would like to connect this to preventing climate change and super consumerism and excessive use of old fuels. So free autocracies have to be contained by deep changes in the global energy sector. So you can see, you can go through the via link, which you can see and read the document as a whole. Here, I would like just to finish with one sentence. We need not to stop war like a ceasefire. We need to create and ensure sustainable peace in Europe. Without sustainable peace in Europe, the whole world is under the threat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valerii, for your great input, and I hope that we will have a fruitful conversation and discuss the issues that you've raised. I'd like to call Auke van Nieuwegem, a friend and colleague and former entrepreneur and a specialist in spiral dynamics. Auke has already done a presentation the day before yesterday, and today he will build on that and also include some of the messages that were touched by Valerii. So Auke, over to you. Given that the people already know you, I'm not saying too much. Please go tell us what is important, and let's move to the discussion soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Katerina. So I will touch upon Valerii's presentation, but also on some of the comments that were made in the previous sessions. So let me just share this. So, and I want to start with a comment that was there made yesterday. So how can there ever be a dialogue to stop bloodshed, destruction, and pain? Right now, when I read this, I can connect to the urge to to stop the bloodshed, to stop the terrible war that's going on. And what I also read is the idea that dialogue could stop that, and that's what I really would invite all of you to look at, to challenge whether that is the case, because I think that obviously, what we've done in the West in the last decades is we've developed more and more a way in which we find a more harmonious ways to work together, not only between countries, but also within organizations and so on. But the question is, does our focus on harmony, on dialogue, on solving these things from our, I would say, our green values, does that really work? So one of the things, what can the West learn? So one of the first things that we have to look at in a situation, and Valerii already really pointed at this, is that other people do not think the way we do, right? So here we see these two people, on this table. Clearly, this was a dialogue just before the war between, you could say between the red and Western Europe, orange, trying to salvage this war, and Putin, just having a very different view of what's happening. So, not everybody thinks like we do, and this is the mistake Europe has been making. We've thought that we could appease Putin if we had fantastic business relationship with him. It didn't work, right? So it's not the way Putin thinks. Putin thinks very much from a red worldview, in which he sees a chaos out there, in which he feels that the only way to survive in that world is to be the strong man, right? And we can connect to that worldview. We don't have to agree with it. We can understand that that's the way that he looks at the world, but it doesn't mean that we have to give him his way. The Latvian president, Levitis, said in an article this week, Russia or Putin is provoked by weakness and not by strength. I think that's also the point Valerii made, right? So with this idea, you know, from our perspective, we think that, you know, oh, if we do too much to Putin, he will use nuclear weapons, he will use this, he will that. It's actually the other way around. If we don't do things, if we don't make a clear, strong stance, then he will see that as a weakness and he will use it to get more. The fact that we didn't respond to his invasion in Georgia, that we didn't really respond to him taking Crimea and invading Ukraine in 2014, means that he saw that as an open invitation to do more. And if we and Putin is not somebody that will change his minds with negotiations. He will negotiate, but his reasons for negotiations are not to find peace, but he will use it strategically for his purpose to gain more territory and to include Ukraine into Russia, right? So what can we learn as the West? And when we look at the situation, we take a step back. If we look at the US, Western Europe, what are really important lessons for us? Well, I think the first thing is that we have to have a deep look at our human values, right? So we have created societies that are more humane than they were 100 or 200 years ago, and I would dare say they're more humane than Russia or than China, in the sense that we have a lot of freedom. Somebody mentioned, oh, what about Assange? It's interesting because whenever we say that in the context of Ukraine, there's only one name that comes up, and that is Assange. So that points out to the fact that, yeah, I don't think Assange should be in prison. I think he's being manipulated by secret services. But the fact that we have these few people there, and actually they're not in prison for what they said. They're in prison for exposing things exposing certain documents. Our prisons are not full with journalists, and the Russian prisons are, right? But having said all that, if you see how we move in the world as the West, this is not what we bring to the world outside our own countries, right? So when I talk to my friends in Turkey, they are very critical of the West for supporting Erdogan. Erdogan keeps them from having basic human rights. They are not free to live the way that we do in the West, but as the West, we keep supporting Erdogan because strategically that's important to us, right? So one of the things we have to learn is that if we want to really bring democracy to the world, we will have to move to a point where human life and dignity outside our own countries is just as important as in our own countries, right? And so no more wars for economic purposes, no more Iraqs, no more Afghanistans. If we, we are, in a sense, we are bankrupt. We're morally bankrupt because we have, the Western imperialism, which is not aimed at adding territory, but it's aimed at economic influence. That has sort of destroyed the Western view or the Western image abroad. So I think that's one of the really important things that we need to learn from this. Another thing we have to learn is that people think differently. So economic ties do not spread democracy. We have to learn, as I already said, that we shouldn't treat Putin with velvet gloves. We should be very clear. And showing power will do a lot more to stop Putin than trying to avoid to step on his toes. Right? And I think that another thing that we're learning is that this fight that's going on is, in my view, it's purely around Western or democratic values in Ukraine and dictatorial values in Russia. But if we look at Western countries, we see that, as somebody already pointed out in the comments just now, we are also regressing in our cultures. We see that we have more and more authoritarian politicians, and we have to learn that if we want to live this harmonious life, we have to be prepared also to use force to protect it inside our countries and outside our countries. Right, so we have to be able to set clear boundaries. I'm not saying we should go around and kill citizens or anything like that, but it's just be very set clear boundaries as to how to deal with authoritarianism, and especially specifically towards countries that then come and invade sovereign nations. Right. I think the other thing, that one of the things we have to address, and I don't really have a clear solution on how to do that, is one of the things we should address is the fact that we have to protect our democracies from the misinformation. From the internet is an enormous tool in the hands of authoritarian regimes to flood us with misinformation about what's going on in the world. This is something we have to find a way forward where we, of course, we don't start to censor things too much, but we have to find, how do we create a system in which we create clarity about what information is true and what information is not true, and how do we stop Putin with his farms full of trolls from influencing our elections, influencing things like Brexit, but all influencing our politics. It's a hard. I don't really know what the solutions are there, but we have to find a way forward with that. And the other thing is, of course, that which Valerii already pointed to, the peace manifest from Ukraine. It's actually an important part of that is to restore justice. So. This war doesn't stop if Russia is pushed back to its border, because Russia has done an enormous destruction of Ukraine, killed people, damaged infrastructures, and so on. And for it to have an open relationship again with Europe and with Ukraine, some justice needs to happen there. There has to be some restoration of justice there. And actually, the Ukrainians have given quite a few ideas also about that. Okay, so then there's one other point that I want to point to, which is a little bit more. I've been looking at the chats that we've had in the sessions the last 2 days, and you could say this is a bit of my emotional appeal to all of you. So, what we've heard in the last 2 days is the voices from Ukraine. We've heard Katrina express how she feels about some of the stuff that she reads on the internet and how that relates to her experience in Ukraine. Yesterday, you heard Mihailo talk about how his daughters are traumatized by not even being in the occupied areas, but by what they've seen in the war. And these are the, in a way, and don't understand, don't get this wrong, but I mean, these are the lucky Ukrainians that are not in the occupied areas where Russia is, committing, is raping, is torturing, is deporting people. These are the lucky ones that are outside it, but still, their life is under constant threat. Also, I think last night there were another, more than 60 missiles fired all over Ukraine. A lot of these missiles are just fired, without much direction, so they land up in populated areas. So that's what we hear. And then in the comments, what I read is, well, there's always two sides to a conflict, meaning two sides must have guilt in this, right? And the other comment I read is we should take an enlightened view, which I interpreted as, we sort of should step above that and value all opinions in that. Now, I want to be clear, Because if we take that view from up there, the first thing that we see is that all these Ukrainians get bombed and killed and you know, get all the violence. The Russian population, there is no threat to them. You know, there is no, before this war started, nobody ever dreamt of invading Ukraine. NATO expansion is NATO is a defense organization. There's no plan, no even remotely, to do anything towards Russia. There is no Ukrainian soldier on the soil in Russia. Recently there's been some explosions and some destruction of military targets or specific, you know, infrastructure targets in Russia, but there's no campaign of trying to kill Russian citizens. So if we want to take that overall look, that's the first thing that we see, right? So we see one population being bombed, the other one not, right? So the other thing is that, you know, if this is a point of view that's important to you, I also want to ask you, you know, when you heard about the Jews in the Second World War, did you also say, well, there's two sides must have guilt in this, right? Or do we see the Jews as being the victims of Nazi aggression? You know, in Vietnam we had the My Lai massacre, right? That is clearly a violation of human rights by the US. You know, it's not. I don't hear anybody say, well, you know, there's two sides to the conflict. You know, these people in that Vietnamese village had that going. That's or you know, that's just how war is. You know, it was a war crime. Right? The same thing if you hear about the torture in the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, right? We condemn that. You know, we say that is a war crime by the US. That shouldn't happen. We don't say, well, you know, that's what happens with war, right? A lot of these people that were in there, they had nothing. They weren't necessarily terrorists or anything like that. Even that, you know, and even if they would have been, they should have been treated according to the Geneva Conventions, right? So if we want to, you know, we want to break, you know, so if we view what's happening here and we go and I think I, like many of you, have done a lot of spiritual search, I should say. And we meditate, you know, we have, I'll just call it our spiritual practice. We have our spiritual practice, right? Which, so how, from that point of view, do we deal with the situation that is emerging here, right? Or that with this information, right? And I think the first thing that the way that I see our spiritual practices is that it is there for us to open our hearts. And if we are confronted with violence like we are here, I think the invitation is to let our hearts break, you know, not to push it away or whatever, but just to let it in, you know, to feel the discomfort. You know, we have this from our meditation practice. I think a lot of us are actually searching for harmony, but this is not a situation that will provide us harmony. So when we hear about what's happening there, and especially, you know, feeling incapable, like I think many of us feel incapable or you know, feel helpless in the fact that we can't really do anything to stop it. I think the invitation there is to let it break your heart, right? And just feel it. And then of course we can use our spiritual practice to deal with that in our system. You know, I've done some training in trauma therapy. You know, if it's too much, you know, it's great to go to our meditation cushion and to regulate ourselves, you know, to find the inner peace and to go back to, you know, to the absolute. But that's not that absolute is a spiritual practice. It's the world is happening here the world is happening in Ukraine, the world is happening in Russia, right? So it's not, and I think there's a tendency sometimes from us to split ourselves from the world with that spiritual practice, but then to stay there, you know. And as a regulation mechanism, I think it's great. But then someday, I think if we want to contribute anything to the world from our spiritual practice, it is an invitation for us to go back into that world and to deal with what's there, you know, and to deal with the dissonance, to feel the pain and to be with that, and then from that position we can always look, is there anything that we can do? And in that, of course, we can also embrace the Russians, in the sense that there's many people in Russia that don't want this war, right? And one of our Russian friends can't be here because he's afraid for the consequences for his family to come here and to speak out. But his stance is, please let Russia lose, because we need that redemption. We need to lose as a nation in order for us to progress to a more human nation, right? We can embrace those people, and some of us may have the capacity to even embrace all the terror that's happening there. Something Marshall Rosenberg would teach us in nonviolent communication, but that doesn't mean that we justify whatever they're doing. And our next guest is Olga, and Katrina will introduce you to her. She actually comes from Belarus, and she's a person whose life is under threat by her government simply because of speaking out, right? Nothing else but speaking out against their government. So when she's talking, my invitation to you is, even if the things that she's saying is contrary to you, and let it break our hearts, and let's see from that position then, what is a move forward? How can we do that in a loving way? And last thing I want to say there is, force can be loving. We can, when your child runs in front of a street, runs into the street, you stop it. You grab it and you stop it, right? And when somebody comes in your home and rapes your daughter, you stop them, right? And it doesn't mean you hate that person. It just means that you stop their destructive behavior. Okay.
Thank you very much, Auke. I would like to add that, as you already noticed, we used a lot while presenting during this 3 sessions the analytical tool of spiral dynamics. The reason why we decided to use it widely is because we do think that this situation requires a very complex view, and we cannot resolve it. We cannot offer any sustainable solutions without a very complex take on it. So spiral dynamics sometimes is used as a tool to look at the societal transformations. And also in this concrete case, when we're speaking about peace, it is extremely important to see how peace is perceived by different stages, by different people who are living different value means, who are coming from different value paradigms. So spiral dynamics is one thing that we wanted to offer as a way to look at the situation, so that we could avoid simplicity. And then another tool that we want to use to speak with you is actually storytelling. We consider that stories are also a very powerful tool to reach people's minds and hearts. So I invited today a person who is a dissident, who is a victim of the regime. A few days ago, Andrei Mukazovchik, one of the key Belarusian propagandists, said that Olga Karach has to be spent down without excessive pity. So Olga is in the hit list. She's basically actually in the top hit or kill list of the Belarusian regime. And the only reason why she can be with us today is because she is in Lithuania. She is a political refugee. She is in Vilnius together with 2 children. However, she's been and still is a founding mother of the Belarusian feminist movement. She is founder of the NGO called Our House, Nasz Dom. She's someone who has been speaking at different international conferences in the name of the Belarusian Civic Society and Belarusian dissidents and victims of war. So, Ola, I would like to kindly invite you to speak, first of all, from the first-person perspective. So, what is your life about today? Like, how does it look like today? Then, what is like life in Belarus? How is it today? How can we feel into it through your words and presentation? And then something very important to know, how your life changed after the full-scale invasion, and what is the role of the war in Ukraine for you, your future, the future of your children, and the future of your country. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, Katerina, thank you very much and for the opportunity to speak. My name is Olga Karachi. Yes, I am from Belarus. I'm human rights defender, pacifist, and the head of Human Rights Center Our House. And but the regime of Lukashenko declared me as a terrorist and 9 times extremist. And in Belarus, for terrorism, this is a death penalty. And do you know why I'm terrorist? Because Alexander Lukashenko accused Angela Merkel, the ex-chancellor of Germany, and me later, of blowing up a Russian military radar station in Belarus, in the town of Vileyka. To be exact, it was the 43rd communication node of the Russian Navy called Vileyka that connects the Russian General Staff with the nuclear boats on combat duty in the waters of the Atlantic, Indian and North Pacific Oceans. By my opinion, it's absurd, but you can find my name in the website of KGB. If we speak about the life in Belarus, unfortunately, human rights defenders and activists in Belarus often find quite different names in the criminal investigation files. Names of relatives who wrote denunciation letters to KGB about them. For example, my colleague Yulia, she was arrested and imprisoned and tortured, discovered denunciation written by her father and her brother in her investigation file. She can be imprisoned even for 20 years for such kind of denunciations. And if you speak about her brother had been helping us in our human rights work with families of political refugees. Yulia prepared breakfast for him, waited for him every evening, you know, but at the same time, he recovering everything what we were doing. With our help of political refugees, families of children prisoners, people who are suffering from repressions. And you can imagine how much such kind of letters and how much impact such kind of letters have for the mental health of the Belarusian activists, human rights defenders, and pacifists. And regrettably, we have many multiple cases when even mothers wrote denunciations of their children to the KGB. 3 days ago, one young man, he was imprisoned for 4 years, only because the denunciation letter of his mother to KGB, because she informed KGB that he was fighting against Belarusian Lukashenko state symbolics. So she was a witness in the trial, and now he's in prison. You can imagine. I have another colleague who was who had to flee illegally through the border. She is a lone mother with 2 very small children, only because the same denunciation letter of her mother about her opposition activities during the protest 2020. I would like to say that pain, by my opinion, pain and despair of the Ukrainian people in this war are beyond all limits. It's even impossible to say about. However, there are one very little consolation, if we are allowed to speak about any consolation in such terrible things now. The Ukrainians know that all those rapists, marauders, murderers are not them, but Russians. They not make part of the Ukrainian nation. And by my opinion, this understanding gives Ukraine a lot of strength and energy to fight and to resist. Unfortunately, in Belarus, we are quite depressed and frustrated because we know who all those people that raped the imprisoned protesters, for example, those who torture people with electric shockers, beat them almost to death, write denunciation letters to KGB. They all are Belarusians. They all are part of the Belarusian nation. Someone's fathers, sisters, mother, relatives, schoolmates, neighbors, colleagues, somebody else. And this is very painful to understand that somebody from your family can do such kind of horrible thing. But if we speak about our life now, in Belarus, children can be removed from the families only because their mothers, for example, openly against the war in Ukraine and against Russian aggression. If you use any kind of yellow and blue color in your clothes, or white and red as the national symbols of our protest, you can be imprisoned at minimum for 15 days. The Ministry of Emergency situations, very often they even steals the bra from the balconies if the bra of women are in wrong colors. Of course, very often this is like red and white, very popular. But so if somebody calls to militia or write to KGB, okay, my neighbor woman use red and white bras, the bras could be stolen from the balconies. It's also absurd, but you know, it's a real terror. But
Olga, maybe you should clarify what does this mean, white and red in Belarus?
We have our national historical flag, white, red, white, and this is a symbol of our independence. This is the symbol of democratic Belarus, and even during the last 100 years, we have the free elections only once, when Lukashenko won. So Lukashenko won when we had the flag, and when he received the victory, he immediately changed our independence symbols for Soviet symbols. He returned Soviet flag and Soviet herb and everything. And now, even if you use the colors in your clothes, for example, I have white dog, you know, and if I make something with red here, me and my dog, we will be imprisoned in Belarus. So this is many very strange, absurd situations, and also Lukashenko's regime use a lot of tools of NKVD, including the putting activists to mental health institution, kidnapping people, of course, torture, everything. But after the war, we have new group of people who is repressed. This is conscientious objectors, because in Belarus, Belarusian go to the army because the army support Putin and support Russian regime, as you know. And for example, for last year, 100 criminal cases against conscientious objectors, against men who is trying to avoid the participation in the army. But at the same time, people are continuing, don't touch weapons on their hands. Do you listen to me? Do you hear me?
Yes, very well. There are some small breaks in connection, but
yes.
you can continue.
Yes, and now I would like to speak about Ukraine for us, for Belarusians, because it's very important to raise up such kind of, by my opinion, very invisible questions. First of all, by my opinion, we have to speak about very bad, by my opinion, very bad process of romanticization of the war and the rapid growth of militarization in our region. And of course, this process has led to an increase in the perception of toxic, brutal masculinity. For example, of course, I mean the identity of an abuser. If you speak especially about Belarusian regime or Russia, and the toxic masculinity is, I don't know how, but now it's only correct role model for men. And as a result, male identity is experiencing a serious crisis that affect a large number of men in our region. For example, I already spoke about conscientious objectors. And by my opinion, the strategic goal number one, if we speak about Belarus, must be to block any participation of Belarusian army in the war in Ukraine. Still it's possible, still it's space to have the influence for the public opinion for Belarus and to build new link within Belarusian society. As I told you, the participation of Belarusian army in the war is very unpopular even among Lukashenko supporters. So we have to use such kind of pacifist feelings to block the participation of Belarusian army in any military games of Lukashenko. Of course, by my opinion, as human rights defender, man who doesn't want, who refuse to take up arms and who don't want to participate in the army, of course, they have to have this kind of rights. We have to help them to avoid such kind of participation. Also, if we speak about the crisis of men's identity, it's very important to say that we have huge pressure for our men, especially with definitions who is real man, who is not. And of course, in this situation, we have a lot of problems with former combatants. We have not many, but former combatants who participated in the war in Ukraine. Now they cannot participate anymore from the health of problems health. And of course, this is very traumatized people, and we need much more help for them because even if we speak about European Union, we have about such kind of 100 former combatants. I speak about Belarusians now, and the specific of the men that before they were political prisoners, they were tortured after they were fleeing to Lithuania or Poland, had some kind of troubles and problems, and after they moved to Ukraine, they participated in the war, returned back, and their life is totally ruined. They have no capacity to solve all problems themselves. So I work with such kind of people. I see how they need the help, especially with trauma, and it's unbelievable. And also second group may be a little less affected by the post-traumatic syndrome, men who are former political prisoners from Belarus. And again, many of them were raped in prisons, many of them fled from the country, and they have very serious post-traumatic syndrome too. And if we speak about post-traumatic syndrome, it's very important to speak about such kind of taboo topic in our region. The increase about increasing of domestic violence in the families where the man is perceived by society as a hero. Of course, for Belarus, both groups, as I mentioned, political prisoners and combatants fighting on the side of Ukraine. And this is a very big problem because, and the problem is being silenced because families don't know how to do about the problem and how to deal with it. It's extremely difficult for women to admit that the man who is acknowledged by society as a hero is abusing her at home due to a very clear post-traumatic syndrome. And very often the woman is the one source of money. She is working and she's dealing with children, and she has to be to organize such kind of psychological help for the man. And we work with such kind of families. This is not easy, and I see how everyone is really emotionally burned out. We really need help in such kind of way. And also what is important, we need to build safe space for women peace builders from Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, because the safe space have particularly disappeared. We have a lot of attacks of ultra-right-wing men, even here in Lithuania. We have a lot of attacks of KGB and FSB, and it's unbelievable, but even within the territories of European Union, we had the case 1 year ago. We involved Lithuanian lawyer to help us with the cases of Belarusian conscientious objectors, and after several months, the lawyer, Lithuanian citizen, he was imprisoned, he was arrested and imprisoned, and still he's in prison under the suspicion of espionage for KGB. So KGB recruited a Lithuanian citizen to follow for us and collect information about our peace builders activities. So of course, in this way, we don't feel security and safety. And by my opinion, this is, if we speak about any kind of peace work for our region, it's important to think about safety and security for active women peace builders from different countries, because we need them. They work a lot of such kind of women. I don't speak only about me, but about many of my colleagues. The women leaders work within the local communities at grassroots level and solve a lot of problems which very often the states even in the European Union cannot solve. And of course, we need such kind of women's energy to change the situation. And also what is important, we see objectivation of women and the systemic exclusion of women from the decision-making process in many ways. We need many women peace builders, and I'm very grateful to our colleagues from Ukraine for Peace Manifesto. By my opinion, this is amazing, very, very helpful document for us. And by my opinion, we need such kind of document for Belarus. And we already started to work for such kind of process, because the fault of Belarusian Revolution 2020 is the consequence that we have no any kind of very serious strategical papers. But now it's not enough to speak only about democracy. We have to speak about independence of our country. We have to speak about also decolonization of Belarus as a necessary part of Ukrainian victory and peace in our region, and also how we can make some kind of limits, or how we how we can go away from the Russian world, from the Russian space influence. It's not easy, and we need Ukrainians because from my experience, Ukrainians are much more sensitive to Russian narratives, Russian propaganda, and by my opinion, Russian propaganda and Russian narratives are very, this is the same like patriarchal narratives, and it's affected for many people, and we have to fight with it, and we have to work much more active with feminist approach, and to develop and to have much more focus for the most crucial level, grassroots. And by the way, the grassroots level is traditionally female dominated. But by my opinion, to go to the end, it's very important, and for me it's very painful to speak about, but competences, capacities and knowledge accumulated by the international peace builders movement are not used now, or used to very limited space, and the energy and inspiration and experience of many peace builders activists are not used at all. And by my opinion, we have a lot of space for peace builders community now, and we have to act urgently. My colleague spoke about trauma work, for example, and many other things, and to bring the peace in our region. I think that it's time to work now, and it's time to activate of UN resolution 1325 for more active involvement of women peace builders in process of peace building in our region. This is extremely important now, to do many things immediately. So I stop, yeah, because I speak much more than 15 minutes. Sorry, yes.
Olga, thank you very much for your story and for your ideas and call for support. There is one very direct and blunt question that I want to ask you, and then we will also invite other speakers. We are colleagues in a way, and we also have colleagues in America, the women peace builders, and one of the tools that our colleagues in America are using in order to promote peace is calling to go out to the streets and march to disarm Ukraine and ceasefire. You, as a colleague and peace builder from Belarus, do you think it's an appropriate tool that may bring our peace, our so desirable peace, closer?
Unfortunately, if you speak about Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, by my opinion, still we work with, or we operate strong patriarchal narratives, and very often I listen that this is two sides of conflicts, like two boys in school. I think that we should use the feminist approach if we speak about the war in Ukraine, and if we speak about a victim and abuser. In this way, it's very clear that if I am strongly support the idea to remove any weapons in the world from everyone, you know, and so nobody has any kind of weapons, etc. But in the situation when Russia has a lot of weapons, just to and Ukraine hasn't, so it means that Ukraine cannot protect. Even I don't speak about victory, but Ukraine cannot protect herself. And by my opinion, but at the same time, I think that still we don't use a lot of tools, like, for example, support Russian consensus objectors, Belarusian consensus objectors, to avoid the participation in the war, because many men in Russia, they go to the war because they don't see the possibility how they can avoid the participation. We have to work with fake news from Russia, and also we have to be very sensitive and very, very strong against now, for example, we have a lot of, unfortunately, we have to speak about, we have a lot of fake news to organize quarrels between Belarusians and Ukrainians, to organize such kind of very bad relationship, including trolls, etc. But if we speak about weapons, by my opinion, we cannot stop it now, but of course it's a question how to make it more in strategical way, how we can do many things, because of course it's not enough to speak about guns, it's not enough to because sometimes, by my opinion, people forgot about such kind of other things. And of course, for me, it's important to speak about other very important issues, about, for example, Ukrainian refugees who is fleeing from the war, about people who lost houses, about a lot of social questions which has to be solved now. And of course, how to fight against polarization in our societies and many other things. So by my opinion, we have to discuss, but main problem in our approach that still we think about Russia and Ukraine like equal sides of one conflict. It's not, by my opinion, it's wrong. If we speak about Russia and Ukraine like abuser and a victim of abuse, of course, this is totally different tools of dialogue. How to build dialogue is totally different tools. How to solve the I don't want to say conflict, but how to solve the violent situation, how to stop the war, and how to bring peace in Ukraine. And by my opinion, just to say, okay, no weapons to Ukraine and we are just sitting around and look, no, it doesn't work at all. And even it's very effective to Belarus because it's very important to understand the war in Ukraine is possible because Belarusian protest 2020 lost. If the war was started only when Putin was quite sure that no any kind of mass protest in Belarus as reaction for the war because everybody is repressed. So this is I understand this is a very painful topic if you speak about weapons, but at the same time it's very important to start from the ground and to understand how we see the war, what means the war. Who is part of the war, side, etc., etc., and of course to help Ukraine in many ways as possible. For me, for example, peace builder society, and if you speak about, for example, some weapons to Ukraine, etc., it's not like opposite each other. This is different strategies how to help people, how to solve the problems, and how to bring peace as soon as possible. But it's discussed, of course.
Thank you, Olga. I would like to invite Valerii and Auke, my invitation is to ponder over the following question. We are here held by and invited by a very solid, warm-hearted, empathic community. And many people in this community, they want to know what can they do in order to bring peace as soon as possible. And on our end, we're doing our best now to offer our perspectives to this very complicated issue. And I hope that we manage to convince you that there is no simple answers And at the same time, there are some constructive directions that we can discuss. I want to ask each of you, what are 1, 2, 3 concrete things that people in this ubiquity community could do so that the sustainable peace could be supported? Thank you. Whoever wants to be the first. Yes, Valerii.
Thank you very much, Katerina. I have just one. Indeed, I understand for the many Westerners, it's really hard to understand through the far optics the events of Russian-Ukrainian war, who is the raper, who is a victim, and so on and so on. But there is one thing which is could unite all of us. I'm talking now about colonized peoples of Northern Eurasia occupied by Moscow regime. There are dozens of nations, probably you never heard these names, but there are millions and millions of these people. And Western media don't want to say about them because it creates a tension with the Moscow regime. Nobody wants to create a tension. So we, the global community, allowed to peoples of Africa to be free. We allowed to peoples of Asia and Middle East to be free. We allowed to peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean to be free. And we refused to be free to peoples of Northern Eurasia. Maybe we consider their blood is not red enough. So my message is very simple. If you don't know what to say about Russians and Ukrainians, please speak up about destiny of those colonized nations of Northern Eurasia, about those millions of people who are simply genocide now, not only mobilized and sent to be killed in action in Russian-Ukrainian war, but also their culture is banned, their language is banned, their identity is banned, and the regime tries to artificially change their identity and to deprive from their lands and from their resources and so on. So nobody would like to speak about those dozens of millions of people and dozens of nations who would like to be free, because the people think that this will be not so pleasant for Moscow regime. So what about empathy? What about non-violence? What about United Nations Charter of rights of peoples? What about human rights and so on? So this is a blind spot of the West, and so indeed they claim their freedom, but how can we say on one hand, Mark, you are right, on one hand we appeal for non-violence, on another hand we appeal for violence to claim for freedom. So indeed there are elites which are now in exile, they claim for freedom, but nobody wants to hear them. Even when they speak from the tribune of the United Nations, nobody wants to hear them. So this is not enough. Should they take guns in their hands? In this case, you will say this is a violence. Should they speak with a non-violent communication? In this case, you will say they didn't claim their freedom. So please speak up about them. That's the only point. Thank you.
Thank you. Olga, do you want to continue?
Just 1 minute here. 1 minute here.
Auke.
Yeah, I wish I had a very clear and direct sort of, this and this you can do, right? So, but it's not, we are all in a way powerless to really stop the violence. But I think one of the first things that we I think one of the reasons that, Katrina, you and I took up Jim's invitation is to seek more unity within what I would call the integral spiral community, right? So because we see a split there. So I think the first thing that we can invite people to is to start, thank you for being here and listening to Ukrainians. Please do that more and more, right? And connect to the people, talk to them, talk to people in Belarus, talk to people in Russia, especially in Americans. I mean, I've been in high school in the US for a year, and I do realize the educational system in the US is very much centered around the US. And I know many of you, people from the US, of course, have been traveling. But there really is this. I really would invite you to look more from a European perspective into this, and so and part of that is, if you are against imperialism, don't just focus on US imperialism. Focus on all imperialism. Realize that the biggest empire in the world is actually Russia. Right, and it's not a story about good US, bad Russia. I hope that that's been clear here. There's been so many war crimes also committed by the US, but in this, but we as an integralist, we have to embrace the paradoxes, and we have to look at the situations and see what is appropriate here, right, and what is the best response. So is the US, what's the role of the US here? And then even we could embrace, a nation can do the right thing for the wrong reasons. Yes, there is, companies that want this war to continue because they'll make money. That's we'll, in the long term, we need to solve that. We need to find a different way of doing that. But right now that's the case. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't buy their weapons now and support Ukraine to stop the violence, right? Because please realize that, because I also see some peace calls in the chat here, and I as an old pacifist, I can really connect to that, and I want you to imagine the real situation. This is not theoretical, but the real situation that a Russian soldier comes in your house and rapes your daughter, right? That is not a situation to be nonviolent. As Marshall Rosenberg, one of the stars of nonviolent communication, has said, there is this appropriate use of force, protective use of force, basically to protect ourselves. So in this, we're in this complexity, and so if you are a convinced pacifist, step out of that. Start to look over the borders of that. If you are 100% pro Russia, step out of that. If you're 100% pro US, step out of that, because this situation is a lot more complex. And right now, some of you may see me as as pro US or pro Western. I'm not. I am pro human progress. And this is a war between totalitarianism and the democratic values that all of us share here. So it is to find a way to support Ukrainians, Belarusians, Russians in obtaining the same values as you do. And sometimes this situation right here, we are calling for military. I mean, I personally would call for a lot more military support for Ukraine, because I find it pathetic how stingy the West is, and how careful the West is. But it doesn't mean that when that war is finished, that we would call for military actions. That's probably not the way to go. It's not. I won't call for a conquer of Russia or something like that. So use all your integral knowledge in that to find what is right in every situation, and support what supports humanity, rather than right now we're often in camps, and that doesn't work.
Over to you, Olga. Thank you, Olga.
Yes, sorry, it was some kind of urgent call. By my opinion, we have to, if we speak about very concrete things, first of all, we have to fight against militarization in our region and against radicalization, because I see a lot of bubbles where people live, and even people stop to speak each other, and this is unbelievable bad. Especially for the people and social groups who has known the war, who is involved in the war. Of course, it's affected, but at any way. And if you speak about militarization, this is many aspects. And Paul is very right about the escalation of the conflict. We see the process. And by my opinion, we have to speak, and we have to spend a lot of efforts and a lot of activities to decrease the escalation as possible. Wagner Group is in Belarus, etc., etc. Second one, and I don't know why the topic is not interesting, still I believe that everyone has made a personal choice. If men don't touch weapons on hands and be outside the war, by my opinion, it's much easier to stop the war and to have the peace in our region. If more and more men should be involved in the war, especially under the war propaganda, it's unbelievable bad. But still, if you work, we had the campaign to help Belarusian conscientious objectors, but it's unbelievable difficult even to speak, to raise up the topic. So this is very strange from many sides, not only one side. And yes, of course.
Can you interrupt you shortly? Would that mean, given the context, given which community are we addressing now, so would it be relevant to say, please support, find ways, first of all, financially, Belarusian NGOs who are helping their Belarusian partisans and possibly what you call conscientious objectors not to take the arms. So you as peace builders who want to promote the value of peace, you can support Ukrainians in getting armed, or you can support Belarusian women peace builders who are dealing with the cause of letting as less Belarusians as possible to take arms into their hands. But for that, very special support and procedures are necessary. So if you want to do that, if you want to put some very proactive, concrete actions, and you're not okay with sending money to United 24, for example, to arm Ukraine, which is, in our view, a very peace-building cause to do, because this is about protective use of force. And in case of Ukraine, it's the only way, only relevant way to resist the invasion. If you are not okay for some reasons with that, please support our sisters in their cause of not letting men take the arms into their hands. And that will be also supportive for Ukraine in a way.
Yes, thank you very much. You formulate much better than me. Yes, I am agree, and by my opinion, it's possible to support Ukraine in many ways, to help conscientious objectors, to help Belarusian partisan movement now, to even explain people in Belarus, for example, they have the right, don't touch weapons, because many of them even don't know about it, you know, and so, or build infrastructure, what we need. We want to build infrastructure to save men who doesn't want to go to the army. We want to build much more active channels of communication with Belarusian society. We want to build much more active civil society groups inside Belarus who support Ukraine and who can be very helpful. For example, to make monitor of such kind of monitor work about deportation of Ukrainian children to Belarus or many other things. So this is what we need practically. And if you speak about Paul, he's very active in our chat. Yes, of course, we are in the common movement of consensus objectors. We don't exclude anyone, but if Katerina, you're absolutely right. This is many ways to help Ukraine. Somebody who wants to work with weapons, they work with weapons. Somebody who can help consensus objectors, please help us to do in this way. Somebody who has brilliant experience to work with trauma, because we really need it now. We have many crazy people. And we already feel it with very, very clear post-traumatic syndrome. Please, we need your knowledge. We need your experience. We need to build, again, infrastructure, especially for former combatants, because as I can imagine, we have many of them now, and we will have more. And with their families, this is also very huge help.
Thank you, friends. Thank you for this rich exchange. I didn't see many questions in the chat, actually, but I remain open to receiving them and passing them to our speakers in case you write to our emails that we left in the chat. Tom, over to you. I hope that it worked well. And please, let's bring together this session to the closure.
Yeah, Katerina, and okay, I can't thank you enough on behalf of Humanity Rising and the Humanity Rising community for the extraordinary 3 days of programming you've done. I thought it was particularly useful to look at what's happening in the Ukraine through the lens of spiral dynamics and integral theory. Your deep and rich understanding of nonviolent communication was also a unique and important perspective on this critical topic. And certainly having Valerii and Olga today and the other panelists who were with us the last couple of days made for just a really rich and important conversation that was so necessary. And when I look at where humanity is in its evolution, the perspective that you brought, while incredibly important for what's happening in Ukraine right now, also applies to all of humanity, all of the places where there's conflict in the world, all of where humanity needs to evolve our consciousness. And I found it both challenging at times and encouraging at times where some of the conversations and some of the questions in the panelists were in the chat were coming from very dualistic thinking, and we've got to shift and move to non-dualistic thinking. And so much of the richness of the last 3 days was moving to non-dualistic thinking and not seeing as somebody was right or somebody was wrong or someone's good or someone's bad, but the beauty in which you invited us to evolve our consciousness, to evolve our thinking, to move to nonviolent communication as a tool, and helping that was just made for an extraordinary 3 days. And I just want to thank you all for being with us today, and the two of you in particular for creating and producing a wonderful series. So
thank you, and Jim, for having us. It was a great honor to cooperate with your team, and thanks everyone who made it possible, all the tech team. We appreciate your help, and all the best to you, Jim, in your travel.
Well, we look forward to having you back again to continue this very, very important conversation. just on a personal level, I want to just share my own, personal feelings and support for the people in Ukraine, certainly the people in Belarus and in Russia and other parts of the world. One of the things that was particularly important during the last 3 days was bringing the personal perspective, the pain, the suffering, the storytelling as you intentionally designed for these 3 days is critical to help all of our viewers understand the personal suffering that happens in war, happens in conflict. So thank you all for being here today. Just a beautiful 3 days, wonderful dialogue today. And we look forward to having everyone with us again tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, friends.